Hello, and welcome back to ClearCast, the real estate fintech podcast. This is episode 11. This is going to be a fun one. I am Jeff Allen, as always, joined by my friend and colleague, Kenon Chen. Kenon, how are you?
Doing pretty good. 2021, huh?
Yeah,
All right.
it's off to a rollicking. We ignore all of the big real world things happening out there and just talk about our little segment of the world, which is the real estate fintech world. So for this episode, we've got some really fun stuff coming up. Later on, we've got an interview with Neel Dhingra, which will be really cool. And we've got a real estate joke of the pod, but we'll wait on that. We're going to start with some discussion of a pretty interesting and relevant to us and to everyone really news story, and that is the recent introduction by the FHFA of a request for public comment on appraisals. Kenon, tell us a little bit about this FHFA RFI.
Yeah, so the Federal Housing Finance Agency, who is the regulator for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac under conservatorship, they came out with a request for information about appraisal modernization. And we've been anticipating this. I'm excited to see it. It's something that has been on the scorecards for the GSCs in the past. The kind of mandate, if you will, to solve some issues in appraisal, especially around capacity, so they've laid out a pretty broad set of questions, and yeah, Jeff, a lot of it hits stuff that we've been talking about. What's next with the use of technology and appraisal. So what are you seeing as you read it?
Yeah, so I think for somebody who's not super close to the appraisal space, they're probably asking themselves, why in God's name are Kenon and Jeff talking about a RFI on this podcast? Because it doesn't sound that sexy or exciting, but it's actually a pretty big moment for our industry. Kenon, as you mentioned, the current traditional way that appraisals are done really hasn't changed in a long time. And as a result, we've got some pretty significant capacity problems and customer experience problems. And so, for example, utilizing some data that ClearCapital has tracked, the average cost of an appraisal is now 24% higher than it was just 5 years ago. And the average turn time of an appraisal has gone up 65% in the last 3 years. So it's definitely time to talk about appraisal modernization. And this RFI represents, a big opportunity for the industry to talk about alternative solutions to a traditional full appraisal. To help assist with the industry's thinking around appraisal modernization and this RFI, ClearCapital has actually just released in the last week a white paper on appraisal modernization. So I like how you're acting like you didn't know that. Good face.
It sounds exciting.
You're a good man. This is awesome. But the white paper is really a peek behind our experiences in the last 2 years doing appraisal modernization testing. And so kind of our experience with using, for instance, non-appraisers to collect property data and provide that to an appraiser to do a desktop, saving time, saving cost, all that stuff. So the white paper's out there for the world to see. It's called Why We're Heading into a Golden Age for Appraisal Modernization. What do you think of that title, Kenon?
It sounds like someone really, creative came up with that title. From a real estate standpoint, though, right? The idea that the appraisal is such an important part of aiding the home buyer in, how to think about the offers they're going to make on a property, how to think about financing, how sellers think about qualifying, offers that they're receiving from buyers. It's it is kind of a topic that crosses over, right, between real estate and finance.
That's exactly right. So it impacts more than just finance. It impacts the real estate world. And what's interesting about the RFI as well is, there's the types of questions from FHFA in there that you'd expect. Questions around appraisal capacity, how to mitigate risk in alternative appraisal methodologies. But there's also some interesting questions in there about potential appraisal bias. And obviously there's been some more stories on that in the news recently of people believing that there's a possibility, some perceptions from some individual consumers that perhaps there's demographic or racial bias implicit in the appraisal process. What's your take on this, Kenon, and where this conversation's been going?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting and really good that the FHFA put in a specific, section of questions around potential racial bias, in the appraisal process, and what could be done to better understand that and perhaps mitigate any problems. There's three streams of conversation happening in the industry. One is just around people's individual experiences, right, that are happening, but there's a larger conversation also around the current structure of how homes are valued and the structure of how lenders think about risk, and whether all that needs to be looked at as well, from a policy standpoint. So yeah, we're going to follow that closely, and it's something that could. It's not just about that affecting one particular group. It's really relevant to, I think, to all of us. So yeah, something we'll be digging into. In fact, there's a lot of events, both kind of industry events on both the real estate side of things. NAR is very active in talking about issues of racial bias and diversity. The Appraisal Institute has an upcoming discussion on it. The Mortgage Bankers Association next week has a conversation about it. So it's front and center in people's minds right now, and it'd be really cool to see some positive change come out of it.
Yeah, it seems like there's an opportunity to have some discussions that we haven't had as an industry in the recent past. And where that goes, I guess we don't know exactly at this point, but it's good that we're at least having the conversation. Yep. So that's what we're looking at right now in the industry and focused on. It's actually a really active time between the RFI, the potential bias discussion, and a lot of really good, important conversations taking place on both of those subjects. But maybe we should spend a little time on something not important.
That wouldn't be anything like a joke, would it?
It would, Kenon.
Oh.
Real estate joke of the pod.
I'm with you.
Okay. Are you ready?
2021 has taught me one thing, which is be ready for anything.
Okay. All right. Here we go. This is the first real estate joke of the pod of 2021. As with most recent jokes, this is an original joke. So there's this loan officer, right? You with me so far?
What's their name?
I don't have that. That's undisclosed.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
The loan officer, right? And one day off the street into his office walks in this like aging rocker type. So, I mean, the guy's pretty old. He looks pretty washed up, but he's still trying to wear like 80s spandex pants. His hair is all hairsprayed up like a hair metal band from the 80s. I know you like those bands, Kenon.
Yeah, I like this guy already.
Motley Crue type, Warrant, maybe Slaughter, if you know that era of hair metal.
Any Metallica in there or what?
No, Metallica was too metal. This is like a hair.
Oh, all right. Blazing?
Yeah. Like LA Strip kind of stuff. Okay. So he's trying to look like that, but he's just like super old and haggard, right? And he's in the loan officer's office. The rocker guy sits down at the loan officer's desk. He's like, "Hey, man, like, I want to get a loan to buy a house, but like, I don't know how the process works." And I gotta warn you, my hearing's pretty bad. Like, I've been a bass player my whole life, done a lot of gigs, done a lot of sets. So you're gonna have to speak up, man, because I cannot hear so good, right? And the loan officer's like, okay, well, that works out. As he talks him through the loan process for a while, he's very careful to explain everything as loudly and clearly as he can so the rocker guy's hearing it all. He explains that the rocker guy's going to have to go get some paperwork, come back tomorrow so they can start the application process. And once he finishes explaining all this, he asks the rocker, so did you hear all that? And the rocker goes, yeah, man, heard it all. Got it like crystal clear, man. Like, I'm going to come back tomorrow and we'll start the process, right? The loan officer's like, you got it. They shake hands. The old rocker guy leaves for the evening. Loan officer goes home, gets some sleep. Comes back the next morning and he goes to sit down at his desk. But all of a sudden, somebody comes crashing through the second story window and falls to the floor of the office. Weird, right?
Who could it be?
Even weirder still is the guy is wearing a furry gray bear suit. Super weird, right? Even weirder still is the guy has an actual jetpack strapped to his back. That's so weird. A gray bear suit and a jetpack crashing through the window. The loan officer runs over, helps the bear suit guy up, cleans the glass off of him, and realizes it's the old rocker guy from yesterday. He has just crashed through the second story window in a gray bear suit and a jetpack. Adrenaline pumping. The loan officer goes, what are you doing? Why are you wearing a bear suit and crashing through my second story window? The old rocker guy dusts himself off, looks at the loan officer and says, what's the problem, man? Like, you told me yesterday that if I wanted a mortgage, first I'd need to koala fly. Do you get it?
the bear suit and koala just didn't. I guess a koala is a type of bear, the koala bear.
And
The size of it, the size of a man, a full-grown man. That just it.
It's bigger. Yeah, the guy would be bigger than a koala bear, but putting on the suit, and the suit's gray.
Yeah.
That he was trying to koala fly with the jetpack. He can't hear very good because he's done a lot of sets in his days, slapping
the bass, playing the high bass. You know that we've never met anyone like that in our past, for sure.
Definitely not.
No.
This is not. Oh, well, thanks again for humoring me, Kenon, and maybe we should proceed with actual, real, important content.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, we are joined now by Neel Dhingra. Neel is a real estate investor, market enthusiast, and mortgage banker with a passion for digital marketing. He's been in the real estate and mortgage industry for over 15 years and currently manages a team based in fabulous Reno, Nevada, which happens to be where Clear Capital's headquarters are. But we didn't bring Neel on here for the local angle today. Neel's here because he does some really interesting things with digital marketing to grow his company's mortgage business. And he's built a pretty cool following of people online who learn about the industry from him, the market, and he also teaches folks how to produce their own digital marketing strategies. So Neel, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff.
Cool. So yeah, you've done some pretty unique things in marketing yourself and your services that set you apart. I was, in preparation for our discussion today, I was spending some time looking at your YouTube channel, and you've got a ton of, really informative videos about the housing market, mortgage rates, the mortgage industry, and it's a pretty unique approach that you don't see every person in the mortgage space take. So walk us through some of those approaches. How'd you get started in it, and how's it going for you?
Yeah, so I had I've been doing this for a while and just was typical as far as like very relationship driven business. Referral partners, people in my sphere, in my network, in my sphere who would, come to me for lending and all that stuff. And I just saw the online people, you know, were dominating in the digital space. And originators can argue all day long, or real estate people can argue all day long about like, hey, we're never going to be replaced by these online platforms, and they're not going to affect my business. But you just see them growing each year, right? And then they're taking more share, and it's not like you lose all your business, but it's like, hey, you're losing a deal here or there. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So it's kind of like it happens very slowly over years. But I just saw like that's happening more and more often. Whereas like I'm being treated more as a commodity. Like, hey, I can get my loan from anywhere. So why should I get it from you? Let me just go shop online. Or, how do you compare to these guys? And also having that same problem with business partners. Like if I wanted to approach somebody and be like, hey, you should work with me as a real estate agent who could refer business, or maybe as a financial planner, or an attorney, or a CPA, or whoever, whatever the typical referral partner sources are for lenders and real estate agents. I was like, how do I look? How can I make myself different? Because we're all saying the exact same things.
Mm.
So if I'm calling these people, they're going to hear the same thing that they heard from every other lender, maybe small differentiation, but you know, and so that I was like, okay, these things are going on. Also, I'm seeing other people dominate in my market who have better connections than I do. So I'm not
Mm.
as known as this guy, because this guy's family introduced him to this builder who introduced him to this, and he got
Right.
all these accounts. And he's
Yeah.
dominating because of his network, and I'm not gonna be able to compete with, because I don't know the same people. I'm not crazy popular in my area. So I was like, okay, how can I compete? And the only, the way to do that is digital, is what I found, is through content marketing. So I looked at initially like what types of content would be the best. And so my first videos were like, hey, I'm the best lender, I have the best rate, and I'm like promoting myself. And then obviously that's just another sales pitch. And we're
Yeah.
so in this industry, we're like ingrained into selling, selling, selling. Cause like, they teach you always be closing, and closed mouth doesn't get fed. And like, like it's great.
I
It's
haven't heard that one.
hustle. And yeah. It's always like hustle and ask for business. And that works in sales, but like it literally will kill you in marketing. You know what I mean? Cause
Mm.
you're just coming across as like a used car salesman at that point, trying to promote yourself. So finally got around to like learning real marketing is like, and how I could provide value to the audience. And so there was two things I kind of discovered. Is one way was, consumers want information about buying properties, how the process works, maybe how to invest in real estate, how to buy rental properties, how to buy their first home when they don't have money, or when their credit, isn't up to par. Like all these things they want to learn about how things work, and no one's teaching them, right? So then they go to online to learn. They get misinformed many times, or they're getting advice that's like tried and true advice from like relatives, and like that may be old advice or wrong or whatever, right? So like there's no real like someone on your level explaining this to you in layman's terms. And then the second thing I thought saw was nobody in our industry is really doing any marketing. So I'm like, okay, how could I help others market? And by doing that, I'm going to provide value to them. And then, that would lead to more business opportunity as well. So I just started going down those two channels, and those were what the most engaging content turned out to be, was just giving a ton of value to whoever the end user would be. So like, what would someone get out of this video, and not worrying about what I'm going to get. And I'll get it in the end, if I just stick with that formula and
Yeah.
do it for a long time. Because people, you'll notice a lot of people will be like, okay, it's new year 2021, let's get on digital, let's do some videos, and they'll come out hot January, February, and then you never see another piece of content from them for the rest of the year. And that's typically the way it goes. And this is the thing, like if you did it all year long,
Mm.
or for multiple years, then you see huge return.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask about how people typically find mortgage, their mortgage brokers, but But I think you've answered that in terms of it's usually relational. It's usually kind of who's got
Yeah.
the connections. So
So
I'm
you
kind of
can't like
curious.
ignore that. You can't like change the way people find. So you still need those
Yeah,
relationships. But how do you get
yeah,
more relationships, right?
yeah. And have you found that as you started embracing, marketing to bring in new relationships outside of just who you know or who you're introduced to, that oh, has it helped you learn anything about the way people think? Like meaning like when you only look at your sphere, you tend to meet people that already maybe have some sort of common connection with you. And then when
Hmm.
you engage with marketing, you might meet someone that's coming with no common connections with you other than the value that they think you're going to bring. But what has that taught you um, about your, what you need to offer folks?
I think you just it's what it's taught me is how to be a better communicator. So like in the beginning, my content, I was great one-to-one. Like I would sit with clients or, meet with somebody one-to-one and I could communicate really well. But when I tried to do it on video, it wasn't coming across right or wasn't confident. Or when I would try and do it to a large group of people, I was bad at public speaking. So I'm like, I got to become a better communicator because
Mm,
um, these people aren't going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Like if somebody introduced me to Jeff or to Kenon and I was like, okay, hey, Matt introduced us. So now like, and they've told you a little bit about me, like now you know about me and I've already got some credibility. That conversation was a lot easier than if I just came to you cold and tried to pitch you on something. You would probably be like, who are you? And not really, you'd be skeptical, right? So
mm,
how could I build that same warm referral without the connector? Because there's not enough connectors for me, So I'm like, okay, the content will do that for you. So say you've seen 5 videos of me and then I reached out to you, or then we ran into each other, or then we were working together on something and I asked you, hey, let's collaborate on this, or let's chat about this. Like you'd be willing to because you already know that, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. He's got some credibility. So it just takes away that whole barrier of like, cold, and that's the worst. I think like for most of us in this industry, that's the worst part of our job is like dealing with people where you have to like explain your value to them. Right. So I got to be like, this is a hard process, and they're thinking, well, why is it hard? Like, are you just saying that? So I'll work with you or, like,
mm,
or this, you need to work with the right people. Well, why? That sounds like you're just promoting yourself, so I think it's just a matter of trying to figure out like what's the best way to communicate all this stuff. And the best
mm,
way is what would be most valuable to that person or that group of people. So if I'm thinking about like real estate agents, what do they all need help with? This same thing. So if I talk about this thing, how they could do it so that, what are they trying to do at the end of the day? They're trying to have more clients, help more people and make more money. So
mm,
like, what if I talked about that? Would they find that useful? Yeah. What are clients trying to do? They don't understand this process, so they need to learn about it. So I'm providing them with what they want. So it's just a different way of thinking from what we're like taught our whole career.
mm,
Yeah. And if the behavior of some of my friends who've recently refinanced is any indication of how normal people value the differentiation of a mortgage lender, they tend to go with the person who gives them the best swag. So like
Okay.
a nice cup with the person's
Yeah.
name on it, maybe a keychain.
Yeah.
Have, have
Trinkets,
you have you thought
tchotchkes.
about that? It is.
Yeah, I used to do that. We have flash drives. I've got hats, all that swag. Yep. So that's the typical way that companies brand themselves. But like the here's what I do. I've got a database of every single person I've ever done business with, right? Or that's ever inquired with me for business. And I'm going to send them my prediction for what's going to happen with real estate in 2021 and what the data points are, right? And even
Mm-hmm.
if they're not in the market to buy a home right now, if they own one, they want to know what's going to happen with one of their largest investments. They want to
Yeah.
know what's going on. It's like news, why are people interested in financial news? Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to buy stocks tomorrow, but they want to know what's going on with their 401k or their portfolio or with the economy. So
mm,
like who's providing the micro information about this particular market? I don't know of
Right.
nobody. Like
mm.
it's to me, it's baffling. So it's like, where in your life have you ever found an opportunity where you're like, dude, I could do this, and no one is doing it. Like literally no one. Like I was like, holy shit, this is wide open. This is a complete land grab. Like every other idea, you're like, oh, this guy's already doing that, or it's gonna be
Right.
highly competitive. It's gonna be very difficult. And I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm just saying like if you stuck with it, you
Yeah.
become the guy. So like
Right.
I've like if I send that video out and it gets a couple hundred views on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube, and then it gets to my database, I've made one piece of content and I've shook 1,000 people's hands with that piece of content, right? It's like
Right.
networking on steroids. I could have never done that before, you know? So to me, it's a no-brainer. And I really don't understand why more people haven't embraced this, because this is literally the way that um, individuals can differentiate themselves from the big companies. So the big guys are going to do things their way, Quicken and Zillow and all Redfin and all these guys who are online and dominating and gaining share every single day.
Mm-hmm.
They're taking that share from local people, even if the local people refuse to acknowledge that. They're taking it from somewhere, right? Those deals are getting done there and they would have been done at a local level. So now, how can the local people be different? Well, you can't do the same things there. I'm never going to be able to run ads for interest rates and compete with Quicken's budget. I mean,
Yeah.
they're literally sponsoring the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? Like, how are
Yeah.
we going
Yeah.
to compete as a local originator? Well, what can I do that they are not doing? They don't have a dude on the ground in the market who's going to explain how to buy your first rental. They'll never do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I can do that. And here's the one I just bought, and here's the numbers on that one, or here's how you do this, or here's, you know, like real advice. There's a huge value on that. It's relatable, you know, it's just information they can understand. So that's where individuals can compete. And I think that's the future of the industry, for those who want to embrace it. And then for everybody else, maybe they're planning on retiring in the next 5 years, so they don't care, you know?
Yeah. Oh, very well put. So want to pivot a little bit to talking about kind of the industry itself and your
Sure.
experience. We spend a lot of time on this podcast interviewing people from all around the industry, you know, talking about changes in the mortgage process, how it's getting more digital, it's getting more automated,
Yep.
customer experience changes. But until today, we've never done an in-depth interview with someone who's kind of on the front line, so to speak, you know,
Sure.
who's like living this every day. So obviously you've been doing this for 15 years now. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen change during that time? What are the biggest changes you've seen in your time in this space?
I think it's, yeah, the changes I've seen haven't been like a click. It's been more just slowly growing. And that is the people are demanding a better user experience. So it used to be the industry model was like, okay, you're in process to buy a house or refinance a house, and let's just get you to the finish line, because, you know, there's a great ending. There's a, you know, you're going to save this much money or you're going to buy this house. It's awesome. But nobody gives a crap how we got you there, right? Like they just want to get you there by any means necessary. And I would imagine like when I first started, you know, clients would get to the finish line. You imagine this guy running up to the end, his like legs gimping and his arms broken, and like he just barely made it. I'm like, dude, you made it. Like, congratulations, because we've abused you for the past 30, 45 days with a horrible process, bad communication, like, you know, all these requirements that we keep asking you for documents. Like, so like this is just what's happened gradually, is like now user experience matters, because if the customer had a good experience and you were organized and your tech stack was correct, and like they could upload documents securely and they weren't worried, and like all the things were delivered and the communication was on point, now they've had a decent experience. Like there's no way we can make getting a mortgage fun, you know, but we could improve the, you know, make it less bad, essentially is how it's been. So now you get to the end, you're like, okay, that wasn't so bad. And if I need another loan, or if anybody I know needs another loan, this is where I'm going to send them. You know what I mean? Like, so you just like user experience became a factor for future business. And that's something I noticed like wasn't there when I first got in the industry.
Yeah, that's great. How has that specifically changed over the past year? So obviously, you know, COVID has been a big
Accelerant.
impact to, you know, an accelerant certainly to the experience and the online experience, but it's also changed some of the handshaking aspects and the personal connection, right? So what sort of things have you done, I think, to adapt, you know, over the past year, and what are you seeing as trends?
yeah, just improve your, improving digital presence, being able to answer questions from people at any time through your content, having, you know, the ability of a client to fully apply and, online and provide all their documentation online at any time that they find, like you're getting applications from people at 2 a.m, because that was the time they got around to it. In the weekends, whatever. So having that presence, and the capability has been huge. And then also just being able to provide, just switching more to like things like we're doing here with Zoom to provide consultations. Like, okay, so say a customer wants to book a consult to go over this process. Can they do so on your website? And then like, how is it done now? Like for most people, I got to call your office, and then I got to leave you a voicemail, and then you'll call me back and let me know. And then you'll get my voicemail, because I don't want to talk on the phone. I hate answering the phone. So then, if I don't know the number, right? So
Yeah.
then now we're playing phone tag, and then I got to find out when you're available. And then I'm like, forget it. I'm just going online. You know what I mean? So like, simple things like get a Calendly that's synced to your Outlook, where someone could book an appointment at any time, and it's going to show them the available times. They can click on it, and then it'll notify you, and it adds it to your calendar automatically. Like just little things like this to remove the friction, right, of like emailing back and forth or texting back and forth. Like, what are the requirements? Okay, here's the requirements immediately of what we're going to need. Set the expectation properly. What are the common things that we need to explain? Like send a video automatically that explains these common things. Like there's ways you can make the process more efficient. And the irony is people will say, I don't have time to do all that. But these are the things that are saving a huge amount of time, right? If I create that, I could say I don't have the time to create that video, but that video has saved me hundreds, if not thousands of hours now, because, you can reuse it. So I think people just have to like buy into this whole thing of like, okay, we need to change this whole thing, because the way we've been doing business isn't necessarily the most efficient way to do business.
Yeah, well put. So we talked a little bit earlier in this episode about the ongoing modernization of the appraisal process. There's a lot of industry movement in that space recently. Generally speaking, what's your kind of pulse on appraisal? Like what comes to mind when you hear the word appraisal?
So I think like everyone's really frustrated with the appraisal process now, only because it created a huge delay, because as the market got super busy, it was the cost of appraisal increased, and the quality and the time it takes to get an appraisal increased as well. Like, I mean, the quality decreased and the time to get one increased. So it's just become more difficult to get, and you're paying more for it, which kind of is not a good selling point to a client. So we noticed, through the agencies, the GSEs, in each rollout, we would get more and more waivers. So it sounds like they're using more automated valuation metrics on the back end to provide those. So that's been great. That's been a great trend. I don't think the industry at large could have handled the level of refinance activity over the last year if not for those waivers, because it would have created a huge bottleneck trying to get all those appraisals. So we noticed, like, I know the stats from the GSEs are like, it's only going to give you a waiver on a fraction of your clients, of your loan applications. But we noticed we were getting, in certain months, 30-40% of the refinance activity was waived. The appraisal was waived on.
Yeah.
So if they've checked the boxes of, there was a lot of data in that market and they met the criteria for equity, it was a lifesaver. So we're seeing that, but then, at the higher price points and with the lower down payment options, it's still, we still have to go through that step. But I've noticed, like, why, if I don't know what the metrics are, but I think it's moving in the direction of like, can we get a different type of report for these loans going forward? I know they can't necessarily waive it at those levels, but if the AVM had a high enough confidence score in the valuation, could we use that, instead of having to get this appraisal? And I think that's the direction everything's headed.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned, the crazy volume over the past year, low rates, and and record setting, especially refi, volume.
Yeah.
How are you gearing up for 2021? Do you think it's well, even after I guess the first couple of weeks of the year, I've had a chance to see, maybe the markets react a bit to, some of the elections and things like
Yeah.
that. But are you bracing for another record year? Or are you thinking more about purchase and a switch over to that market?
Yeah, we had always been focused on purchase, just because I kind of seen several of these cycles where, refinance activity booms and then it quickly dies.
Mm,
So I didn't want to go all in on refinance activity like a lot of other originators are doing right now. So we just stayed focused on the purchase side and the relationship side, and then we obviously our first you know criteria for which people we want to go after for refinance activity was our own database of clients, because we want to take care of our clients. So that
mm,
was like kind of like the initial step, and then before we start reaching out to cold um, leads out there for refinancing. And so I think as long as rates stay in the same range what they've been in, even though we've seen a little bump in the last couple of weeks, they're still insanely low. So I think we've only scratched the surface. I think there was some data point out there that only, 20 to 30% of people eligible for refinance actually have done it in the last 6 months.
yeah.
Probably because there's been so much chaos with families and politics and work and all that stuff, and you just haven't gotten around to it. Like,
Mm,
so I think there's still a ton of refinance activity to be had. So that should keep everyone pretty busy. And then the only thing that's holding us back on the purchase side is just this. I think there was a stat put out this week that home resale inventory has reached an all-time low.
Yeah.
mm,
So we're qualifying, you know, handful of borrowers every week to go out there and buy homes, and they're not finding anything. There's nothing out there.
mm,
So it takes a long time to get somebody into a home.
yeah.
Sometimes, they get lucky and they get something right away, but a lot of times people are looking for months to get into a property. So that's
Mm,
kind of the only barrier. But I see it like this month so far, like we've been busy or busier than we were in any of the months last year. So
Wow.
well,
I haven't seen any slowdown as of yet.
how's
Yeah.
Reno, as an area? I mean, there's a ton of stories in the news
Yeah.
about, the flight out of California, and since Reno is literally 30 minutes over the
It
state
is.
line there, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, it's just that trend has not slowed. So we have, extreme population growth from California um, to northern Nevada. And it's like there's Reno, Sparks, there's all these small cities that surround us. And all those markets have been just benefiting from that huge influx of people. So um, that trend of like companies moving here for tax benefits, as well as, you know, people moving because of California's issues or whatever that is not slowing down. It seems to have gained momentum because of COVID. So that's really created this inventory shortage here because nobody prepared for that level of growth. The new stat is 100,000 people are supposed to move here over the next 36 months, and we just don't have the infrastructure. So you're seeing like no matter what you need, if somebody's good at providing that service, you can't get it now. Like there's not enough service providers. So somebody needs like for example, like a bunch of people want to put pools in their homes, right?
Mm, yeah.
Like it takes 2 years now to get a contractor to do a pool for you, because they're so backed up, or just any kind of service, home improvement. Every service provider, if they're good and they have some decent level of reputation, is just buried with work right now. So it's been great for the economy here. But it has created some some like growing pains is probably what I call it.
Yeah. And so laws of supply and demand. More service providers will come to Reno. Things will eventually, those growing pains will subside to some degree. But the only way that's going to happen is if Reno starts to build a lot more housing, right, to house all
Yeah.
these people who are coming in. Does it seem like Reno is on the right track there? Are they doing enough building to keep pace?
They're going as fast as they can, but then they have a labor shortage is what all the builders here are complaining about. So
Mhm.
they said they can only build so fast because of um, I guess they mentioned two factors. One was the lumber and materials costs have exploded this
Mm.
year. And then also labor costs have gone up, and there's a shortage of labor. So we're just seeing like, delays. It's taking, people are getting into contract for homes that are going to be built in 6 to 8 months or longer because of the backup. So that's, they're building as fast as they can, but I think they were behind the curve. Like they didn't anticipate. So they're just building as they go. They didn't want to, like, everybody kind of still has PTSD from 2008 and 9. So these builders don't want to build a bunch of inventory and be sitting on it. They want to sell it and then, build it.
Right.
So that model, creates a problem now because there's more, if you go to any of these builders, they have waiting lists, or if they don't have a waiting list system, they release homes and then there's people fighting for those homes every time they release. So, it's just, it is a lot easier to buy a new home than it is to buy a resale, just because there's less competition, but there's still a shortage even on the new home stuff. So that's something to pay attention to. I think they're trying to ramp that up. And then the second thing that could be a problem here is we saw this play out in California, is there's just not as enough affordable housing. So these guys are all building at higher and higher price points, but they've completely kind of abandoned, probably just like, the economics of it doesn't work anymore because of these costs. They're not building, that entry level housing. So we've seen the median home price just touch under 500,000 for the first time in this market. And that's great, for people who own, but for the guy who's trying to buy his first home for two or 300,000, he's now priced out of the market.
Right. Well, I'm guessing our listeners weren't expecting such hot Reno market discussion in this podcast, but I'm glad we hit on it.
Well, it's probably not unlike other markets, right? I mean, there's probably markets just seeing the same things that we're seeing across the country right now. I know in Vegas, it's a similar story. Not as bad in Vegas because they have a lot more inventory, but it's probably
it's true everywhere. We track data on supply and demand by market and prices, and you're spot on, Neil. It's everywhere. Reno seems like it's definitely been particularly impacted because to your point, Kenon, all the Bay Area residents are like, wait, there's no restaurants or concerts? Well, I'm not going to live here anymore.
Well, Neil, we haven't even opened up, it's not like we're open like Florida or Texas has been. So, it's just, I think it's more of like Kenon said, is like, we're close to the border. Like this is the easiest one to get to first, maybe, you're still the states you're seeing with the most incoming migration are Texas, Nevada, Idaho, Arizona. And then for some reason, Washington was on there. I don't know what the deal was with Washington, but people are definitely making moves. And like you guys also alluded to earlier, was like, you can now work from anywhere.
Right.
So then, if you don't need to be in the Bay Area and paying these ridiculous housing prices, you can come over to Nevada.
Sure. And you got Lake Tahoe is a huge draw for where you want to be. If you're not working, you want to be outside and somewhere beautiful. So
awesome.
Yeah. Well, great.
Well, Neel, thanks a ton for joining us today. Neel's website is neelhome.com. That's NEELHOME.com. And hope to have you back again someday, Neel.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, nice to meet you.